Start your timer. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to Sunshine for Your Life. I want to start off today by talking about a story, a true story about a little boy and his talk with a huge football player. I was watching television, and this happened very recently, like last week, and I didn't catch the beginning of the show, but it was a show that I think a football player who was in full uniform with pads on and huge person was talking with a very small boy. And I'm thinking that maybe he had just come into a class of first graders about that age and given some kind of a motivational talk about being a football player. He was fully dressed, he had on his pads, he had on his uniform, he was very impressive. He had muscles on top of muscles. He was absolutely huge. And I think that if he wasn't such a decent person, if you saw him when he was angry, he would look very intimidating. Well, he was talking to a little tiny boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He probably was 6 years old. He probably was in the first grade. And but he looked smaller than that. And so somebody gave him a microphone, and he asked the football player, "Can I ask you a question?" And the football player said yes. And the question was this, and I just wanted to laugh. It just struck me so funny. How many glasses of milk do I have to drink to be big enough to play football? And I could just hear his mother saying, "You'll never be big enough to play football if you don't drink your milk." Can't you see a mother actually doing that? So this little tiny boy, very small, asked the question, how many glasses of milk do I have to drink to be big enough to play football? And the response of the football player was really priceless. He scooched down as small as he could get so he wouldn't tower over the child, hands and knees just going down as far as he could. And he very gently put his hand on the little boy's stomach, and he very gently said to him this, "You drink as much milk as your little tummy can hold. You drink as much milk as your little tummy can hold." Now, I was very impressed with the football player, and I was very impressed with the little boy who wasn't intimidated, he wasn't afraid, he had a question. And as I said before, I can imagine his mother saying, "You won't be big enough to play football if you don't drink your milk." And I can imagine the little boy thinking, well, just how much milk is that? And he's thinking in terms of glasses of milk. How many glasses does he have to drink enough milk so he actually could grow big enough to play football? And he's asking that question unafraid. And the football player was very gentle, very kind, and he scooched down and just answered the question in a general way. Now, I was very impressed with it because, one, the football player was so good to the little boy. He could have set him to one side. He would have said, "Look, kid, you'll never be big enough. You're so small," or "You'll have to drink milk for the rest of your life before you even get big enough to play football." Or he could have been sarcastic, or he could have been rude, or he could have ignored the child, or he could have given him some kind of a cross answer, but he didn't. He treated the question with respect. He treated the boy with respect. He knew where the boy was coming from. "I really want to get big. I really want to play football. How do I do it?" "Well, Mom says I have to drink a lot of milk." Maybe he doesn't like milk, but he's willing to drink it if he is going to be big enough. I can remember when I was a child, I had a teacher who was very tall. She was about 6 feet tall, maybe a little taller than 6 feet. Very tall, very thin, but a very nice teacher. I liked her immensely. And children identify with figures that are important to them. They identify with their parents and with other important figures. figures. And I can remember I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to be tall. Well, as a small child, I wasn't very tall, but I was fairly tall for my age. So what I did is I started eating a lot of vegetables. When my mother cooked carrots, I drank the carrot juice, anything I could that would make me be tall enough so I would be like this teacher. Well, of course, I never did get to be tall like her because it's not in my genes, but nonetheless, that was my attitude. I wanted to be just like her. And I can imagine this little boy wanting to be just like that football player, big and strong. So he answered him right. Now, somebody else might have figured it out. How many glasses of milk does it take to be big and strong? Well, I started to think. I used my calculator. When I was a child, we had to drink a glass of milk at every meal. My parents were concerned about our getting enough calcium for our bones as growing children, and we didn't have a lot of money. My parents weren't, they just had modest means, but we had to drink a glass of milk every meal. So I figured it out. Supposing the child is in the first grade, and he's probably about 6 years old, and supposing he has to drink 3 glasses of milk a day until, like, say he's 18 or considered to be of legal age, that would be 12 years. In 1 year, he would drink 1,095 glasses of milk if he drank 3 glasses of milk a day. We're talking about 8-ounce glasses. But in 12 years, he would be drinking enough milk to equal 13,140 glasses of milk. Well, you can imagine what his reaction would be if some football player said, you've got to drink 13,000 glasses of milk before you're big enough to play football. But it just makes me think, the way that he treated this child and the way that he worked with him made me think about how Jesus answered questions and how he worked with people and how he talked to them. Jesus told stories, which are called parables, and he did it to teach a truth or a moral lesson. And his stories were based upon what people dealt with every day. He did not try to say, oh, look, I'm the king of the universe. I'm the creator of the universe. Just ask me a question and do what I say and you'll be fine. He worked with people on their level. And so his stories were based on what people would be familiar with. Many of the people were fishermen or shepherds or farmers. They worked with the ponds and the lakes getting fish, or they led their sheep. They were just common, everyday people. And so when he talked to them and he taught them in ways that they would understand. The kingdom of heaven is like a woman who is hunting for a lost coin. She hunts until she finds it. The kingdom of heaven is like, and then he would give a story about it. And that's the best way to teach, because when you teach, you want people to understand what you're saying. You're not out to prove how bright you are or how much education you have, although I know some teachers who have done that, and it's really shameful because nobody learns anything. They just learn that the teacher is arrogant and proud. But if you're teaching, you want to teach in such a way that people understand it. So he talked about fishermen, and he talked about shepherds, and he talked about farmers, and he talked about catching fish. He talked about becoming fishers of men. You catch fish now, but you can be fishers of men. So I want to read the first verse I have here. It's Mark 1:17, and I'm reading it from the NIRV version, and this is what it says. Come, follow me, Jesus said. I will make you fishers of people. And I'll repeat that. Come, follow me, Jesus said. I will make you fishers of people. So what is he telling them? I want you to help people. I want you to bring them to me. You're not going to just catch fish. You're going to catch people. But it's phrased in such a way that they knew what he was talking about. Jesus preached and he taught people. He was not arrogant. He was not proud. He taught simply. He told the truth. He explained the gospel. He healed people. He fed the 5,000, and his teaching was nothing in terms of arrogance. But if you come to me, I will teach you. If you come to me, you won't be hungry again. If you come to me, you won't be thirsty again. Now, of course, he was speaking in a spiritual sense. But it's important to know that Jesus had very strong feelings, emotional feelings, love for the people that he was trying to reach. And he tried to reach them in a way that they would understand them. So they wouldn't say, I listened to him, but I have no idea what he said, or I have no idea what he meant. You know, sometimes you go to a class and you just have no idea what the teacher's talking about. And I'm talking specifically about classes in college. I had one class where a professor, and he was one of my favorites, so I'm not saying this because I'm downgrading him at all, but he would cough or he would hiccup or he would stop and he would say a few words and then he wouldn't say anything. He would say a few words and then he would not say anything, or he'd repeat himself. You couldn't get anything from his lectures. He was a very great man. He was a great researcher. He was well known, but he didn't have the gift of teaching. Jesus had that gift of teaching. He could tell people what they needed to know, and he didn't demean them. He didn't tell them, oh, you're stupid, you don't understand that yet. I've seen teachers do that too. He was a wonderful teacher. Now I'm going to read another verse, and it's going to be from Mark 1:38. I'm also taking this and reading it from the NIRV version, and this is verse 38. I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to come back and read another verse with it. So this is what it says, Mark 1:38. I want to go to the nearby towns. I must preach there also. That is why I have come. So let me repeat that. I want to go to the nearby towns. I must preach there also. That is why I have come. Now I'm going to read that plus another verse which will not be on the screen, and that would be verse 39, which follows it. I want to go to the nearby towns. I must preach there also. That is why I have come. So he traveled all around Galilee. He preached in their synagogues. Now I need to tell you there is a difference between preaching and teaching. It's not the same thing. There are people who think that if you can teach, you're automatically a good preacher, but it's a different process entirely. People don't often see that. The preparation is different, the planning is different, and the goals are different. Nonetheless, there is a similarity. So for Jesus, he could teach, he could preach, and he went into the synagogues. He could preach to people and teach them individually, which he did sometimes. He could teach them in groups, which he did sometimes. He could stand on a boat close to the shore and then preach to people who were on the shore, which could be a great number of people. So he did both, and he did it well. John 11 talks about Mary and Martha, who were sisters, and their brother Lazarus had died, and they loved Jesus, and they knew that Jesus loved them. And to understand his teaching, you have to understand his character. When their brother Lazarus died, they wanted Jesus to be there, and he did go there, but not immediately. And I really believe the reason that he didn't go there immediately is that in that day and time, the Jews had a law that a person was not legally dead until about 4 days after their actual death. So a person could die, and they were dead, of course, but not legally until 4 days or so had passed. And so if Jesus had gone immediately and raised Lazarus from the dead, which of course he did, what would have happened was that people would have said, well, he wasn't really dead anyway because the 4 days had not passed. So he went and eventually got there, and he asked where they put Jesus, and they showed him, and the Bible says that he wept. You know, this is not on the screen, but I'm going to say that what it says in John 11:35. It says Jesus sobbed in the NIRV, and then it follows it up with verse 36 that said, then the Jews said, see how much he loved him. Now, most Bibles will say Jesus wept, and it's considered to be maybe the shortest verse in the scripture. However, in the NIRV, it says Jesus sobbed. He really did love them. And the people that he taught, he loved. He loved the people. He loved teaching them. He wanted them to know him personally. And so he taught in a way that they would be able to understand him, because he did love them, and many of them loved him back. Now, Jesus could teach in groups, as I said before, or as individuals, and in the way that he taught to meet needs. He taught to do instruction in a way that they could understand, and I know I'm kind of being a bugaboo about that, but it's true. This is what he did. He answered questions clearly. He helped people to understand spiritual things. Now, in Matthew 12:47, he said he was talking to a crowd of people, and people said, Jesus, your mother and your family is outside. They want to see you. They want to meet you and talk with you. He had a crowd of people around him, and somebody stopped him and said, your mother's outside. She wants to talk with you. And so Jesus even used that as a teaching moment. Jesus replied and said, who is my mother? And who are my sisters and who are my brothers? And then I'm going to show this on the screen, Matthew 12:50. He answered his own question, and this is what he said, Matthew 12:50, and I'm reading it from the NIRV version once again. And this is what he says, anyone who does what my Father in heaven wants is my brother or sister or mother. Let me read that again. Anyone who does what my Father in heaven wants is my brother or sister or mother. You see, he does consider us to be a part of him. He does consider us to be a part of his family. And what he's saying is, I love you as much as I love my original family. And if you do what my Heavenly Father in heaven wants you to do, you're a part of me and you are part of my family. So he used everything he could as a teaching tool. Now, I have taught for years, and I've seen a lot of people teach people without any compassion, without any care. I remember when I was teaching high school that we used to put the grades on the report cards. We would get together as a group after classes were over on an afternoon, and we took all of the report cards, which would be handed out to the students the next day, and we put all of the grades on them. And the comments that I used to hear were just heart-wrenching. Oh, look at this. He flunked this again. Boy, is he a dodo. Oh, he's pretty stupid. You don't expect him to learn anything. And they sometimes even made fun of their students. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you in the teaching profession? If a person can't understand, it's not always their fault. Maybe they just can't understand. Or maybe there's something wrong with your teaching that they can't pick it up. I try to make my teaching simple and try to bring it down to earth so people will be able to understand what I'm saying. But I've known teachers that use that teaching skill that they have, or lack of it, and use it for arrogant purposes, to build up themselves. There was a professor that I had in college. Well, I didn't take any of his classes. I refused to. But there was a professor in college that many of the students would really say bad things about. But he had the habit of trying to prove to his students, this is a college professor, his main goal was to prove to the students how smart he was. And so he would use the biggest words, the highly technical words, and express himself in ways that it would be very difficult for the students to understand him. And they would complain about it. And when I had the opportunity to take a class from him, I wouldn't take it because I know I would be subject to the same thing. And he was really, in a sense, cheating himself as well as the students. He was cheating the students because they're not able to understand. They had to decipher everything he meant. They shouldn't have to do that. It should be plain and clear. But he was also cheating himself by being an arrogant teacher in which nobody wanted to take his classes because he thought he was great, he was so hard, he was so bright. Now, I know the psychodynamics behind it, which I have no business discussing here. But Jesus always, when he talked to people, he made everything he said plain and clear and simple. And he could confront people. He certainly confronted the woman at the well, but he did it in such a way that she became a believer. And then she really, in a sense, became the first missionary because she went out and told people and said, this person knows everything I did. He is the Messiah. He must be. Who else could he be? And they started coming to hear him. So she's the first missionary of the church, if you want to consider that. And so his teaching was pure and simple and direct, and this is the way teaching should be. So my point is that when you're dealing with people, you need to make yourself understandable. When people are dealing with you, they need to make themselves clear and understandable. Then both teaching and learning can be a wonderful experience, because throughout our lives we will both teach and we will both learn, and we're going to be able to do both of them. Throughout our lives, we're always going to be learning something, or we're always going to be teaching something, or we're always going to be setting an example for somebody to learn from us. So we need to, if we are Christians, rely upon God to lead us in such a way that we communicate with people in such a way that they understand us and we can help them. So I'm going to close it here. I'll be doing something else next time. Please join me then.